Okay, welcome everybody. Lovely to have you with us this evening. Welcome to this evening's webinar, Freedom from Fatigue, with myself, Wendy Day, and Nicole Askwith Williams. So it's great to have you here. Please do type any questions you have in the chat box as we go along, and we'll try and have a look at those as we go. And as Nicole mentioned, if you wouldn't mind just staying on mute, that's really helpful, just so we don't get any feedback noise during the recording. Okay, wonderful. So we might have a few more people pop in, but we'll make a start. So I'll just start by telling you a little bit about myself. So I'm Wendy Day. I'm a trauma-informed health and wellbeing coach, and I'm a chrysalis effects specialist practitioner. So what that means is I have specialism working in the field of fatigue and burnout, and I help support people who have burnout, and also people who are experiencing chronic exhaustive conditions like chronic fatigue, ME, long COVID, and fibromyalgia. And this is because I've trained in this area after recovering my own health from 8 years of chronic fatigue syndrome. So I've been working with NHS and private clients to support them to make the changes that are needed in our lifestyles, in our diet, in our mindset, to recover from these conditions. And we're here this evening to talk about fatigue and just to try and help you to make the changes early on if you're struggling with these kind of symptoms. So the sorts of things I was struggling with when I was in fatigue were IBS, constantly catching viruses of all kinds, migraines, lots of gut issues. And I'm just going to clarify what we mean by fatigue. So obviously, we all get tired, and usually we can recover from that tiredness quite easily by catching up on our sleep and looking after ourselves better. But if we end up in chronic stress, and Nicole's about to explain this in a lot more detail about our stress hormones, but if we're pumping out adrenaline and cortisol all of the time for prolonged periods, we can get really exhausted. Our adrenals can get very exhausted, and then we find that we can't actually recover from tiredness and stress that easily. And even, you know, having early nights for a week might not make any impact at all. And that was what was happening with me, because I wasn't listening to the messages that my body was trying to give me. So I'm hoping this evening that you'll come away with some really good tips and ideas on how you can make some changes now if you're struggling with this sort of symptom, you know, turn things around for yourself to feel a lot better and improve your energy. So I'm going to pass over to Nicole now, who's going to talk to us all about the stress hormones.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining and watching back. Just a little bit about myself before I go into, as Wendy said, stress and cortisol in particular, and how that has an impact on our bodies and our brains. I am an online women's health coach. I am the founder of a community called the Women's Wellbeing Club, which some of you may have seen and been a part of who are watching this back. But I wasn't always a health coach. I actually had a 10-year corporate career in finance and insurance. I was a product manager, so I worked for big corporate companies and also some startups. But along the way there, and also when I went to university, I had struggles similar to kind of Wendy, you know, my own struggles around my skin, my hormonal health, my gut health, and working through those different corporate companies. I was seeing women on the daily struggling with that work-life balance, energy levels, knowing what to do at what point of their cycle, going through menopause. So my interest in women's health and general health and well-being has always been there from a young age. But I left my corporate career last year to focus on my community, and I'm now also an educator and speaker. So I also do courses for individuals, for coaches around women's health and well-being, but help people on an individual basis as well. So we are going to get straight into what actually is stress, and how that has an impact on our body. So I'm sure everyone here has said, oh, I'm so stressed. Oh, I'm really stressed. Oh, this is really stressful, right? And that's not always a bad thing. You know, we need stress, we need cortisol to do certain things in our body. But breaking it down on like a way that hopefully you can understand it and you can kind of go about your day and think about this. Cortisol is the main stress hormone, and as Wendy said, it is produced by your adrenal glands. So within your body, you have something called the endocrine system, which is how hormones come from your brain all the way through your body and trigger your body to do certain things or feel a certain way. And your adrenal glands are part of that system. So it's really important. We need them. And as I said, it's not just a bad thing, because cortisol itself helps with metabolism. It helps with different regulations around our energy. And because we know what stress is, we're like, oh, this is stressful. Sometimes we need a response to stress, and our body needs to know exactly what to do in that situation. So I've just broken it down here into two sides around our nervous system. So we actually have two types of nervous system, much of a better word, but your body has its own natural feedback loop, is how I like to explain it, which regulates between those two different nervous systems. So some of you may have heard of fight or flight, when it is a little bit like, oh, what am I going to do? I need to sort something out. And it is that kind of, that little bit of excited energy or stressful energy in your body, versus the rest and digest. Those are pretty much your two nervous systems, and they're proper names, as I like to call it, is your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. So as I've said, they're both very, very important. However, if you are experiencing your body being in that fight and flight nervous system for prolonged periods of time, or you are feeling that you're in that more than your rest and digest, again, you are dysregulated in your body. We should be balanced out in between them. So within that fight or flight, that is when that cortisol hormone goes up, and your body is basically getting ready to do an action, to make a decision, to, you know, this comes back from when evolutionary times, when we used to be cave people and we had to chase away from tigers or chase away from bears to go and get food. You know, our brain is still wired in that way. So it's a natural thing. Everyone has this. But as I said, it's really, really important that we start to identify and regulate when we are in this fight and flight position versus that rest and digest, where your cortisol then goes down. And again, coming back to that evolutionary aspect, that is when the threat has passed. So that tiger's run away, you haven't been eaten, you've got your food, and you sat down, you're like, oh, I'm safe again. But in our day and age, a lot of what we are surrounding ourselves with now, a big one in particular, I'm sure lots of people will relate, is your phones or TV or just screens. Certain things that you're watching or how that stimulates your brain is almost forcing you to be in that sympathetic nervous system. So it's not a natural thing that we are meant to be doing all the time, which is why sometimes we can feel more stressed than we should. And work being a massive one. So as I was saying earlier, I've struggled with things at work before. I have witnessed lots of women also struggle with things at work. And that's something I help my one-to-one clients with, is that balance of how we should be feeling at certain times. So just on the screen there, as I said, you know, cortisol and stress isn't always bad. We do need it for some things in our body. But if you are in that stress state a lot, there are some short-term and long-term impacts and effects that it can have on you. So positive short-term things is that increased alertness, that increase in energy. So as we said, if something is like needs to happen, you need to make a decision, that actually helps you do that within that situation, right? And that's good. However, the negative long-term impacts here, as Wendy was saying at the beginning, are things like increased anxiety, are things like increased fatigue. And when it comes to health and fitness from a coach perspective, that can also contribute to weight gain or just weight management in general, which we are going to go on to in a second as well. Immune system, that is so disrupted by constant stress. You know, Wendy gave examples again that she experienced herself. And the link between cortisol and your other hormones in your body as a woman, like estrogen and progesterone, so your main sex hormones. And then that can lead to cycle disruption. So with your menstrual cycle, and then alongside that menopausal transition, when those hormones are already starting to go a little bit more up and down. A massive one, which comes up a lot, is sleep. So I wanted to just pull out a couple of things that are, in my opinion, more important when it comes to your well-being linking to cortisol. And yeah, the biggest one for me is sleep. So if you are having extreme spikes in your cortisol, you are going to have massively disrupted sleep. So not just insomnia where you can't sleep, but actually if you end up going to sleep, you don't have good quality sleep. So you could be having short bursts, you're not in a full sleep cycle, and then that is going to impact how you're feeling the next day, weeks, and that can just kind of build up and build up, as Wendy was saying. So just a little bit of a background of how this works and how it does interrupt your sleep, because I think that's important when people say all this stuff but don't explain why. So when people wake up, your cortisol is going to be the highest. That is natural. That's absolutely fine. And if you are waking up at the same kind of times every single day, this is going to be your peaked level of your cortisol. And what that does is it wakes your body up, which you need. You need to have that energy to get out and do what you need to do for your day. And then throughout the day, it will just gradually decline. So in theory, with that natural cycle, if you're looking at a graph, it should be, up here when you are waking up, and then it slowly goes down throughout the day just before you are going to bed when it's at its lowest. And then when that cortisol does drop, in the evening, alongside, you getting ready for bed, you're turning your lights off, it's starting to get dark outside, melatonin, which is your sleep hormone, that actually does the opposite, and that rises, and that gets you ready to go to sleep and go to bed. But when your cortisol is switched around, when it's elevated, when it's disrupted, that natural decrease throughout the day does not happen properly. So that production of cortisol versus melatonin getting you ready to go to bed doesn't work properly, and it can be suppressed, or it can just not be being produced enough, which then makes it very, very, very difficult to fall asleep. So hopefully you can kind of see that link just from that small, if things aren't kind of decreasing properly versus your melatonin going up properly, you are not going to be able to get to sleep. So you may be awake for long periods of time. You might wake up and not have full sleep cycles, because that's super important as well, that we have our full sleep cycles within our deep sleep and our kind of light sleep, our different ways that we go to sleep. And in that healthy kind of 24-hour cycle, so or 12-hour cycle, when you're waking up and going to bed, when that cortisol is at its highest, what that is called is cortisol awakening response. So you may see it written down as just CAR, but that is what we were talking about just now. If you're ready to start the day, it's at its highest, and when you wake up, when you are in that chronic stress state, so as Wendy was saying, it's quite normal sometimes to be a little bit tired, if you've had a hard day at work, or you've been out and about for multiple days on the trot, and you're not getting your normal sleep in your night. It's okay to be a little bit tired, but when you are in that chronic stress state, so very, very high, it can seriously, again, disrupt and flatten that cortisol awakening response. So that actually then leads to you feeling tired even when you've just woken up. So if you're feeling super burnt out, things are happening at work or things are happening at home, and you're feeling constantly tired all the time, this kind of response system is the main reason why, because of that flattening of that natural level of how it should be higher in the morning and lower in the evening. And another thing that is for me really, really important, not just for sleep, when it comes to stress and talking about stress, is how it impacts your brain and the different parts of your brain and your decision-making process. That for me is probably the most important. When that cortisol level is elevated for a long period of time. And I'm just going to pull out a few areas of the brain. Obviously the brain is massive with all these different things in it, but I've pulled out some of the main ones. So your prefrontal cortex, so this is the part of your brain that is responsible for the decision making. So those executive functions, when you're planning for something, you're problem solving at work, or it's around those kind of impulse behaviors, right? It's like that thing, that really important thing at the front of your brain that's like, right, we need to do this. So if you have high cortisol levels, it can seriously damage that part of the brain, which that then, if that part is super helpful and important for making decisions, you are not going to be able to make important rational decisions if that part of the brain is a little bit disrupted. So the one thing, the example that I always like to give, because it sounds really sad and awful, but hopefully everyone can relate, is if you've ever had an argument or if you've broken up with someone and you are extremely emotional, you're extremely stressed, you don't know what's going on, you cannot make a rational decision. You cannot actually make a logical decision of what's happened, because you are so in the moment and you're so emotional, because that part of your brain is not working how it should optimally work. All right. So yeah, if that is cortisol is in that part of the brain for a long time, it can really impact it on a long-term basis. Another part of the brain is called the hippocampus, and this is really important for your memory basically and your learning, so how it categorizes stuff in your brain after you've like processed it. And again, high cortisol and stress can really damage the neurons in that part of the brain, so you may not actually be able to make new memories as well as you were when you weren't as stressed, or when you retrieve kind of existing ones that are in your head. And again, linking this to the breakup scenario, or if you're really sad, it can be really difficult if someone's trying to talk to you and this is classed as like a new memory. You probably won't remember that conversation because you are so in it. Again, you're so emotional, you're so stressed, it's not allowing that part of your brain to work in the best way. And then the last bit of the brain that I'm just going to pull out is something called the amygdala. So linking this back to emotions a little bit, the amygdala is what I call like the brain's emotional center. So this again is very linked to stress, but also fear and anxiety. So if we are talking again about that elevated stress levels, and stress is an emotion, right? Yes, it's caused by that cortisol and that feeling of stress, but it is an emotion. So if this emotion center in your brain is also having that cortisol there and it's very overstimulated, again, you are going to make yourself feel even worse, and you're going to have those very heightened emotional responses to things, which leads back to the prefrontal cortex. When we are trying to make those decisions, we are really leaning into those emotionally driven decisions rather than the logical, rational decisions that we may need to have to make. And then I'm going to hand over to Wendy, and she's going to talk about when people are experiencing all of this stuff happening in our brains, actually what you may end up doing or tend to do as coping mechanisms from all of that happening.
Thank you, Nicole. And all of these things you've been talking about, takes me back to when I was experiencing that, and the anxiety that comes from not actually understanding what is causing those symptoms to happen is huge. So it's really important to understand what's going on and that it can be addressed and it can be sorted out. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit now about the sorts of things that I see all of the time that people tend to do when they're exhausted. And I did all of this as well. So I wonder if you can relate to any of these things. No judgment at all. I did all of these things, but they're not helpful. They actually make the issue worse. So often people tend to grab things like caffeine, alcohol and sugar to just keep going if they're just really struggling through the week. But then we get into this cycle of overstimulation. And often, people might end up on medications to deal with the symptoms, but they're not actually getting to the root cause of what's causing them. So, unfortunately, the NHS doesn't have treatment plan or cures for things like chronic fatigue. So they will give out pain medications, sleep medications, antidepressants for people if they're struggling and can't seem to sort it out. And this can be helpful to make you feel better in the short term, but in the long term it's not actually addressing the root causes, and then your body also has to deal with processing the medications. Something that I see a lot as well is people pushing themselves even harder when they're really exhausted. So for example, Saw this a lot with long COVID. When people have had COVID and they haven't got over it well, sometimes people think, oh, I need to get down the gym because I'm really unfit, so I need to, you know, get fitter, get healthier. And actually the body just needs to rest, and so that's actually not helpful. Withdrawing from social events and spending the weekend resting to get through the week. We see this a lot with corporate people who are I don't know if you found this, Nicole, you know, just sort of crashing out of the weekend just to be able to get back to work on Monday, and cancelling seeing friends. And then you haven't got any balance in your week because you're just working and crashing out and not really having any fun. Putting on a brave face, so not really feeling able to tell people because you feel you should be coping better, perhaps comparing with others around you. And also putting off self-care. So particularly if you've got kids, perhaps, you know, there's always something going on with children. I remember thinking, oh, I need to see someone, but I'll just wait till my son does his GCSEs, or I'll just wait till this has happened and then I'll make that appointment. And we really need to try and prioritize our self-care so that we can actually have the resources to do everything and help all the people in our lives. So I'm just going to move on now to looking at the 8 elements wheel that I use with my clients. So this is from the Chrysalis Effect program. And I'd like to invite you to just have a think about this wheel is a representation of all the different areas of life, or some of them. And it's the holistic approach that I use with my clients. So the idea is that you give each section a score out of 10. So perhaps while I'm just talking through this, you might like to just have a think about what you might score each of these areas out of 10. So I'll just run through quickly. It's just a bit of a whistle-stop tour this evening. So nutritional health, as I mentioned, often people are relying on sugary things to get a quick boost. They might not be hydrated enough. They might be overstimulated with caffeine, and that's stimulating their adrenals even more, leading to more exhaustion. Finances is a big trigger for people with stress and can be a big drain. If you have anxiety about finances, I wonder how you feel about that and what you would score your relationship with money out of 10. Emotional health is a really big factor. So we've spoken about anxiety. Often we see people with a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety about symptoms, not understanding what's going on. There might be other things going on emotionally, anger, resentment, perhaps if you're under a lot of pressure or in difficult relationships. And it's really important to know how to express your emotions. So if you're somebody that holds in your emotions, that can take a lot of energy to keep all of that in. So it's worth considering, you know, how much you're kind of expressing what you feel, what your needs are. And that leads me on to environment. So in that section, I often see issues going on at home, such as clutter, which can be really draining to be around. Perhaps your home is not where you'd like to be living and you need to consider a move. Perhaps there's issues going on with the people in your environment at home and the energy, the feeling in your home. So it's important to consider you know, how you feel when you go home. Think about how you feel. Do you feel calm and relaxed at home, or are there things there that are low level stressors that are draining you? So lifestyle and pace is a really big issue. There's a lot of belief in society about how busy we should be. Some people feel that busyness, you know, is a badge of honor almost. I don't think society really rewards us with rest. So it's very difficult for people to rest without feeling guilty or lazy in some way. And it's very useful to think about how much you're cramming into your week, how much pressure you're putting onto yourself to fit things in, and about the sort of messages that you receive growing up around rest, and whether you only rest perhaps if you're really sick. So rest is really important, and there's lots of different ways to rest: mental rest, emotional rest, physical rest. So yeah, lifestyle and pace is a really important section to look at. Relationships is also very important. So there can be a lot of issues around relationships. I had to do a lot of work around issues like people pleasing and poor boundaries, not knowing how to be assertive, not knowing how to say no to people. Perhaps you've got friends in your life that are really draining, but you don't know how to say no to them, or you feel you should always be there for them. And we can have a lot of beliefs around how we should behave towards other people that can sometimes make it very difficult for us to make changes in those areas. So, and sometimes we feel responsible for other people's feelings and these sorts of issues. So that's a really big area that can make a big difference. Movement. So finding the right kind of movement for you, depending on where you're at. It might be that you need to find the right kind of exercise for you. If you're really fatigued, you might want to think about lower impact exercises like yoga. I found very useful, and there's all kinds of yoga depending on where you're at. There's even yoga for people that are in bed, yoga nidra. Then I started with restorative yoga, and you can move on to other types. But obviously, you know, if you've got energy, you might want to consider other types of exercise as well. But it's important to think about how we're moving. And life purpose is a really good one. So perhaps you're in corporate, but actually you're a really creative person and you're missing out on that outlet for your creativity. We see this quite a lot at Chrysalis Effect. A lot of clients that come in have come in from corporate or from teaching or from the NHS in really high pressured environments. And often when they get well, they don't go back to those jobs. Have a think about how you would score out of 10 in those areas. And I wonder which part of the wheel you think needs the most attention. So you can always watch the replay back afterwards and have a bit more think about this and pause the recording. So when you've filled in your scores, you can join up your scores like this and have a look at where are the areas that need the most attention. And then you can start to think about what changes you might want to make in those areas. So I'm just going to move on now to talk a little bit about, oh no, it's your turn now, Nicole. Nicole's going to talk to us about stress management now. So we can move on to looking at some of the ways that we can bring in helpful coping mechanisms for our stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I do something very, very similar with my clients and have done in the past in terms of that wheel and different options. I think it's really important to look at things holistically because there are lots of things that align and do this, as I always like to do in my talks. They always cross over. So just some more practical implementations, I guess, from a coach, a health coach perspective. Nutrition and lifestyle changes are massive. Wendy has just gone through so many different options there of different areas that you may need to look at to manage certain parts of your lifestyle, whether that's work, whether that is boundaries and friendships and relationships. But nutrition as a whole and how you fuel your body is so important. We are not talking about nutrition in super great detail here in this webinar. That is a whole different, could be a whole different 10 webinars on different topics, but nutrition is so important. So if you do need help with any of that, obviously reach out to Wendy, reach out to myself. Some mindfulness techniques. So I personally have ADHD, so I find it very, very difficult to meditate, but I know other people find it really calming and lovely to meditate. So again, it's about finding things that work for you. What I find has helped me, however, regulate my breathing sometimes to feel a little bit less hyperventilating again for a descriptive word, is the simple box breathing. So what that is think you have a box in front of you, a square box. You breathe in for 4, you hold it for 4, you breathe out for 4, and then you hold it again for 4, and then you do that again, and you can do that as many times as you want. And that is so great because you can do that wherever you are. You can do it in bed, you can do it in the car, you can do it in the gym, you can literally do it wherever you are. Exercise, we've kind of touched on that, and movement in general. It doesn't have to be weight training in the gym. Obviously, I would recommend that because that's got so many other proven benefits, but it could be a dance class, it could be a walk, it could be a bike ride, it could be going swimming, it could be literally anything that you enjoy, just to get your body moving a few times a week, because it is going to really, really help how you feel. Sleep hygiene, you know, I touched on sleep earlier, but a couple of just tips off the top of my head right now. Waking up and going to bed at the same time every day. This is a little bit tricky if you do shift work, but you can still have 3 to 5 things that you are doing to get yourself ready for bed, for sleep at whatever time of the day. So yeah, those 2 things. Your bedroom should only be used for going to sleep or having adult sleepovers. There should not be a TV in there. There should not be music stuff in there. There literally should be a bed and that's it. And if you've got an ensuite, you've got your ensuite door, okay? There should be nothing else in there. Supplementation alongside food. So we touched on nutrition and how important it is for fueling your body. But if you are struggling to get certain things from your diet, if you are a vegetarian, if you are vegan, if you potentially have an iron deficiency, all of that kind of stuff, supplementation is really helpful. Some natural supplements that may support things like what we've been talking about in terms of stress levels and being a little bit calmer are things like adaptogens. So these are things like ashwagandha. You may have heard of it, but they are just natural kind of remedies to incorporate into your day. For things like ashwagandha, I would recommend taking it in the morning because that's when your stress levels are at its highest, just to help that regulation throughout the day a bit better. But again, everyone is going to be a little bit different. So if you need specifics on this, then I would reach out to myself or Wendy on some more of this.
Okay, brilliant. Some great advice there. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about using mindset and beliefs to start overcoming fatigue. So we've already looked at the well, and that's a really good tool to help you build awareness of what might be going on that is draining your energy. But then the next step is to identify that and start to make a plan where you might want to start. So you don't want to get overwhelmed by trying to do all the areas at once. So maybe pick one that's a priority or that feels achievable. And then the way that I work with people, and I'm sure you're the same, Nicole, is to set goals. So the goals need to be achievable for you and personal to you. And, you know, the goal is to make positive change that's going to impact your health and well-being positively. And part of our job as coaches is to also help you identify any obstacles, because this is where people get stuck. It's so much easier to just keep doing the same things over and over. But if you want to make a change to your health and well-being, you do need to start doing things differently. And people get stuck because they come across an obstacle. So actually bringing up the ideas of what those obstacles could be in the session is so helpful, because then you can, you know, say that out loud and start to make a plan. If that happens, how will I deal with it differently? So, you know, if you're someone that gets really stressed out and ends up grabbing a packet of biscuits, you know, how will you do it differently? What changes will you make? And being as specific as possible about how you're going to achieve that goal is really important. So you can get an accountability buddy to help you. Perhaps you've got a friend, or you can get your partner to help. That can help as well. Having that accountability is huge. Or of course, you can work with a coach for that. And the other thing that clients often find very helpful is sometimes you need somebody to help you look at your values and beliefs. So sometimes we have beliefs that we're not even aware of, because 90% of our thinking is subconscious. So going back to the example of, you know, perhaps having a friend that keeps offloading onto you and you're just finding it exhausting, but you don't know how to sort of step away from that or put a boundary in place. Sometimes it's really hard to make those changes because you might have an underlying belief that perhaps you're not a good friend if you're not available all the time, or perhaps you want to let go of being on some kind of committee or something that you just don't have the energy for, but you have a really strong value of duty that's been passed to you, perhaps from parents. And it's really important to understand what our values and beliefs are, and working with somebody else can be really helpful to uncover those, because they can stop us from making changes, because they're often driving our behavior and we don't even realize. So for example, I'm an A-type personality, so I've always been very driven and achievement focused, and that has definitely played a part in me ending up burning out. So it's really useful to sort of look at these things, and you always have the option to make different choices, and it's really useful to consider the impact on your health and well-being if you do nothing, because sometimes it can be very difficult to find the motivation. So, you know, when I work with clients, I often ask them, how will you feel, you know, in 6 months or a year if you do nothing about these issues? It can be helpful to think about that. And how will you feel, you know, if you do make all of these changes, and really to connect with that vision and goal for your wellness. So that's a little bit about how I work, and I'll just talk a little bit now about some of my tips for practices and tools that you can use to boost your energy, similarly to Nicole's ideas. So I recommend to my clients to get out in nature as much as possible and to enjoy their pets, because these things are so calming for the nervous system, which is a really important part of getting into that parasympathetic state that Nicole was talking about earlier and switching us into a healing state. And also meditation and mindfulness, as already mentioned. So finding what works for you is it's important to find the thing that does work for you. So sometimes we're really exhausted by overthinking. So mindfulness and present moment awareness, I find really useful for that. Getting into the body stops you from being flooded with thinking, and that's why the box breathing and other breathing techniques are so helpful, because they bring us into the body. So yoga, breath work, alternate nostril breathing is another one. Tapping, EFT, emotional freedom technique is very helpful for calming the nervous system, for lowering cortisol. And there's a great app called the Tapping Solution, which is very good if you want to have a look at that. There's lots of stuff on YouTube. And then you can work with a coach or a counselor, or cognitive behavioral therapy is also very good if it's if overthinking is an issue or you have a lot of anxious thoughts. I spoke a little bit earlier about the importance of boundaries and assertion in protecting your energy that you give to other people. Perhaps you're someone that is very overgiving, or finds it difficult to delegate to others and feel you need to do everything yourself. And perfectionism can also feed into that, of course. So moving towards self-compassion, being kind to ourselves rather than being hard on ourselves and beating ourselves up. And another thing that I really encourage people to do is really to connect with their hobbies, because we can get into a state where we're just work focused and to-do list focused, and then we're just resting to carry on doing more of that. But it's so important to do hobbies, because the things we love actually bring us energy and can really boost our mood as well. So have a think about what you love to do, and perhaps try and bring some of that in if you can. Okay, so I'll just finish off my section just by letting you know that I offer a free 30-minute no obligation health profile review. So if you are struggling with any symptoms and would like to have a chat, I can send that over to you to fill out, and then we can just have a chat and see how coaching could be really helpful for you. I work in Sevenoaks in Kent, face-to-face or on Zoom. And all my details are there on the screen. So you can follow me at Wendy Day Wellbeing on Facebook and Instagram. And I've got a special offer for attendees of the webinars today, and also next week we're doing another one. So I have a 90-minute wellbeing deep dive session that I do with people, and that is a one-off session to go through the wheel together, to score up the wheel, and then identify an area that you'd like to work on, set a goal in that section, and come away with a plan of action to work on that. That is usually £97, but for attendees of these webinars, I'm offering that at £65 if you book by the end of March. So that's all about me. Nicole, would you like to say a little bit about how you work?
Yeah, of course. So there's a couple of things on there. Social media is on there too. Our website is on there, so the womenswellbeingclub.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn for any corporate people. The QR code on there, the top one, will take you to our free resources page on my website, so there's some more free stuff for you to have a look at. And then similar to Wendy, if you have liked what I've spoken about today, or feel like you would benefit from a little bit more of extra help, there is an essentials package that I have together, which is a very condensed version of the way I do coaching, but it is a lot cheaper for you to just have a little bit of a look on some of our resources, some more videos around hormonal health, because some of those main pillars that I spoke about, sleep, recovery, food, learning how to regulate your body properly, as well as some recipes in there as well. So all of that in there is £97, and you have lifetime access to that within our hub. So that's the bottom QR code. But my DMs on socials are always open. I speak to quite a lot of people. I know some of you that will watch this back, I've spoken to in the DMs as well. So yeah, always reach out if you want any help.
And don't forget, we've got another webinar next Wednesday at the same time, where we're going to be talking about challenges in midlife, aren't we? And specifically around hormonal regulation, but more on the female hormones next week. And also just talking about, again, stress management, but looking at specifically the types of things that people have to manage with their families and different kinds of stresses. So we hope that you will join us for that, and hope that you found this really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I will stop recording now for people that are here live, and hopefully we'll see some of you on our next one.